では、すいません。ちょっと遅くなりましたが、始めていきたいと思います。サムさん、皆さんと知り合いの方も多いと思いますので、はい、ただ、ちょっと時間になりましたので、始めていきたいと思います。NGO2030 主催のウェビナー、進化する NGO の役割は、サム・ワーシントンさんに聞くにご参加いただきましてありがとうございます。私ども NGO2030 はですね、ジャニック国際協力 NGO センターのワーキンググループの一つで、2030年に向けて NGO のあるべき姿ということを考えながら、さまざまな、テーマでですね、NGO に役に立つテーマを拾って、ウェビナーなどを開催しております。で、今日はですね、大変、経験豊富で、かつ知見のある、NGO 業界のですね、代表するお二人に、今日はご登壇を、いただくことになりました。実はですね、私、3月に、別のですね、フォーラスというグローバルの NGO ネットワークの会合で、サムさんのお話を大変、共感を受けて、ぜひこれをですね、日本の NGO の皆さんにも聞いていただきたいと思って、今回、ウェビナーへの登壇のオファーを、させていただき、快く、了解いただいたという経緯がございます。で、サムさんはですね、もう皆さんご存知の方も、もう多いと思うんですけれども、アメリカで最大の NGO ネットワークであるインターアクションの代表を長年、されていらっしゃって、かつ、さまざまなグローバルの NGO の代表、理事とかですね、アドバイザーなども、されていて、現在はそのフォーラスの、シニアフェローも、されていらっしゃる、大変ご経験が豊富な、方でいらっしゃいます。で、今日ですね、その、聞き手として、今日ご登壇いただくのは、ジャニックの元、事務局長理事でもいらっしゃって、C&C リング代表、またエースのアドボカシーオフィサーなどを務めていらっしゃいます若林さんに、聞き手として、ハムさんのお話を聞いていただきます。それでは、もう前置きはこのぐらいにして、若林さんにマイクをお渡しして進めていただけたらと思います。では、若林さん、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
はい、柴田さんどうもありがとうございます。今日も大変お忙しいところですね。この朝早くからこのイベントにご参加いただきましてありがとうございます。サムさんもどうも、今日はご登壇いただきましてありがとうございます。昨年6月でしたっけね、台湾でのイベント以来と、いうことになりますので、こうやって今日お話しできることを非常に嬉しく思っております。今日初めてこの AI トランスレーションを私、経験するので、どこまで正確に翻訳されているのかっていうのはちょっと自信がないんですけれど、まあ、当初は
若林さん、
英語で、
すいません。ちょっと
はい、
通訳のことを言い忘れたので、ちょっと補足してもいいですか？すいません。はい。
はい、
で、今日、
言って、
はい、
はい、
今、紹介された通り、AI トランスレーションを使っ、Zoom の AI 機能を翻訳機能を使いますので、サムさん、英語でお話しされますので、通訳が必要な方はですね、字幕表示という、アイコンが皆さん、いろんな機能ボタンのところにあると思いますね。そこで、字幕の表示というのを、押していただくと、翻訳というボタンが見えると思いますので、その翻訳をですね、オンにしていただいて、もし私の字幕言語というところが、日本語じゃない言語になっていれば、私の、字幕言語を日本語にしていただいて、見ていただくと、翻訳、されて字幕で見れるちらをご活用ください。もしわからなければですね、ちょっとチャット等で私宛てにご連絡いただければと思います。はい、ただ、はい、大丈夫でしょうかね。はい、ちょっとやってみないとあれだと思いますね。はい、それで少し通訳を使っていただけたらと思います。はい、以上です。すいません、岡林さん。
はい、わかりました。当初はね、英語で話そうかなと思ったんですけれど、まあ、今日の参加者が基本的に日本人だということですね。日本の方だということで、このトランスレーションシステムを使って、いきますので、私もこの出た日本語に基づいて話をします。つまり、この英語と両方聞いちゃうとですね、逆に、混乱する可能性があるので、 彼はこの日本語にとって、それは英語に翻訳されたのを見てますし、私はこの翻訳された日本語だけを見てですね、今後進めていきたいと思いますので、ご理解をいただきたいなというふうに、思います。もちろん、英語に、直接言語で聞けますので、サムさんの言葉はそれで、理解するっていうのもありますけれど、基本的に私の司会役としては、この翻訳された日本語に基づいて、お話をしたいなというふうに、思っております。で、今日の、最初の60分間は、基本的にサムさんへの質問と、そのディスカッションということで、質問についてはちょっと少なめにさせていただきたいなと思いますので、その後にあと30分 Q&A の、自由にできるところもありますので、そこで聞いていただければなというふうに、思っております。で、今日のテーマはですね、私はホープだというふうに思っています。サムさんの翻訳、執筆された本が Prisoners of Hope ということで、ここにあるんですけれど、混沌とした世の中で、世界の断絶というような話もありますけど、でも我々にはホープがあるんだと。我々はできることがあるんだということを、その方向性について少しでも見つけることができたらいいなというのが私の願いであります。で、今日はですね、非常に幅広い質問は一応彼には投げかけてあります。で、具体的には、まずは世界全体の話をした上で、アメリカの民主主義とか、あるいは自由人権のリーダーとしての、そのリーダーシップがちょっとやっぱり欠如しつつあると。でその中で、アメリカの、国際協力の推進する USAID が昨年解体されたり、非常にヨーロッパでも ODA が削減されて、おりますので、その最新動向をちょっと伺いながら、これからの国際協力のあり方、ODA のあり方、そして我々 NGO はどう振る舞うべきなのか、行動すべきなのかというところについて話をし、最後にクロージングとしてですね、ホープとして次の世代に向けたですね、メッセージをサムさんからいただいて、最初の60分間終わりたいなと思いますので、これだけ話しても自分でも終わるのかどうかっていうところがあるかというふうに思いますので、早速進めたいというふうに思います。まずは、世界の情勢というところでありますので、ご存知のように、今の、イラン、ガザ、様々な紛争が世界中で起きてて、やっぱりこれまでの秩序が崩壊しつつあるんではないかということであります。カナダのカーニー首相はですね、今は世界秩序の断絶が起きており、もう移行期ではないんだと。大変な状況なんだという話が、ありました。でも、それでも我々はできることがあるということがあるんですけれど、その意味で、まずはサムさんにですね、ちょっと自己紹介も含めながら、好きにですね、今の情勢をどう見てるかっていうのをちょっとお話をいただければなというふうに思います。
Thank you. And thank you, Hideki-san, and to everyone on the JANIC team for this opportunity to speak with you. And apologies for speaking in English. Hopefully the interpretation is working well. It is an honor to join you my evening, your morning, to give some reflections on the NGO sector from my perspective and the world that we're living in. Many of these ideas come from my book that's been mentioned, Prisoners of Hope, in a sense of what is the role of the international NGO in a period of profound disruption. I've been in this field for now going on my fourth decade, and at no time in my life experience or in the experience of any time since 1945 have we seen such a disruptive period in the international system since its founding period years. We're this rise of authoritarianism, the sort of nationalism, the geopolitical rivalry, the decline of commitment to international law comes across a lot of this. And a lot of that challenge comes from the political change that is happening in the United States. And I'll get in some detail as to what that change means. We all know that the basic foundations, democracy is facing its most serious global challenge in decades. We're seeing a shrinking of civic space, civil society space in more than 100 countries. Governments around the world, including in my own country, are increasingly restricting civil society in the name of national security and in some form of resisting foreign influence. And the U.S. has joined Russia and China in openly disregarding international law when it conflicts break its own national interests. We see this in Gaza. We're seeing this in the U.S. Invasion of Iran, but we're also seeing this in the embracing of corruption and the support for authoritarian actors around the world. Our challenge is that the public in many countries, that the sort of trust in democratic institutions is declining, not because it's been a failure, but because people don't know any other form of government in many of the more affluent countries, and there's sort of an appeal of other forms of government, and as has been said by I think it was Churchill mentioned of democracy being the worst form of government except for all the others, but that isn't a knowledge that people have, and this lack of confidence in governance itself is showing there, and the sad consequence of this are acutely felt in areas where we're seeing two areas of genocide in Sudan and Gaza, areas of sort of unrestrained warfare in Ukraine and Iran. But in many places, the poorest countries and the poorest individuals in the poorest countries are the ones who are suffering the most. I think as civil society, we have a sort of a role to play in defending democratic norms and civic space. We could do this by building broad coalitions, and how we do this, I could get into that in some detail, but also we need to be focusing on, as NGOs, on the role of accountability, on more transparent governments, and in essence of human rights. For U.S. NGOs, and speaking for myself here, I think this is a profound period of humility. We have a definite role to play with our own government. I could get into that, but I think at the same time, there's a significant amount of learning that needs to go on from U.S. NGOs as we enter this period here. And I'll stop there. But I mean, some of the trends we're seeing is the larger NGOs in the world are getting larger, and I think they have a responsibility for the broader sector there. And we're seeing this evolution of NGOs between continuing to be service deliverers of ODA, official development assistance of government, and increasingly having their own programs, which is the case in Japan, but also in becoming social advocates. I give an example here. I noticed that Churchill Service Japan is on here. I'm on the board in the U.S., and it's been interesting to observe a large INGO focus on refugees lose almost all its government funding. So you're looking at very large 80% cut or so of its government resources, and then the choice of, with the remaining resources, what do we do? Do we focus on how to get back government money, or do we realize that there is a role, at least in this case for a U.S. NGO, to resist the changes that are happening, to speak truth to power, to protect individuals who are harmed, and to build coalitions around the values that the organization stands for. So I think this key lesson here, and then part of those lessons is really been looking to Asia and other places. One advantage, and I know this may not feel like an advantage for Japanese NGOs, but because many of you are founded on private resources, this challenge of being too dependent on government, you have an independence that is the envy of many U.S. NGOs. Also across Asia, we've seen civil society have a remarkable resilience in terms of under pressure, and I think we're having to learn what happens to civil society organizations under pressure in the U.S. There's a long-term approach of coalition building, of organizing as coalitions across Asia, which we've seen in many ways, and a sort of what I would call strategic patience in terms of the ability of different parts of civil society to relate to each other. So whether it's in Japan or South Korea or Taiwan or other places, a lot of the support for the NGOs comes from grassroots or individuals from the population at large. And I think this, I'll end with this here, is really we are in a period where democracy needs a sort of continual renewal. And as we enter a new era that is in many ways going to be one of the most challenging for the international NGO sector.
Thank you very much. すいません。英語喋っちゃいけない。日本語で喋らなきゃいけないんですけれど、最初から少し広いですね、質問を投げかけましたので、後ほど少しブレイクダウンして深掘りしていければな、というふうに、思ってます。で、サムさんの話を聞いて、非常に今深刻な状況にあるということなんですけれど、この混沌とした民主主義を否定するような動きについては、これは一時的なものなのか、これからも継続的に続くものかというちょっと質問を投げてみたいと思いますが、いかがでしょうか。
Unfortunately, the translation stopped working for that bit. If you moved on to a sort of commitment to democracy and decline of global leadership, or if you could repeat it, let me see if the translation continues.
今の混沌としたするような国際情勢っていうのは一時的なものなのか、それとも、トランプ政権が終わった後もですね、こういう傾向が続くのかということについては、どう見てらっしゃるでしょうか。Do you understand what I asked the question?
No, it's not translating. It seemed to have stopped translating. At least I'm reading across the bottom.
若林さん、すみません。念のため、若林さん、もしかしたら言語が英語になっているのかもしれないですね。若林さんの英語がきれいに日本語訳されているので、通訳、字幕のとこから会話言語、日本語になってるか、ちょっと見ていただいてもいいですか。
会話言語、そうか。すいません。ちょっと待って。ごめんなさいね。会話言語は。
It says English translation not supported. It's saying it wants to do it into Norwegian.
But that's not translation.
若林さん、質問だったら短いので英語でやられたらどうですか。
はい、わかりました。今これだけど直さなきゃいけないんで、いずれにしよう。What I asked the question is about this is a one-time trend or will continue for the it's coming years after the Trump second step down.
That's a good question, and hopefully I'm being translated to Japanese. We will likely see this November the Democrats taking control of the House of Representatives and perhaps the Senate, but there will no longer be just unified Republican control across all branches of government. This will lead to greater dysfunction in the U.S. as the political battle for control in the U.S. Accelerates, and I don't think it will have negative consequences on ODA, but it will make the U.S. more inward-looking as the political battle unfolds. There is the broader question really is this rise of an authoritarian leader and the ideology that comes with Trump going to continue? There is no clear leader after him to continue it, and there's always been a very poor shift from one authoritarian to another authoritarian ideology. That said, there is a significant portion of the U.S. public, maybe 25, 30%, that is very comfortable with having an authoritarian leader. The other thing that will remain, I think there will be a significant distrust of the United States and the role that it has traditionally played imperfectly as a champion of democracy or rights around the world. So there will be a political vacuum that will remain, that largely has been sort of filled with China, others moving into that vacuum, and in some places simply a vacuum that's not there. It is possible over time we will see some greater investments in ODA, but the challenge to the multilateral institutions of the world will be significant because there is no country that is able to step into the role, at least immediately, the role that the U.S. has played. And we'll see how that shifts. At the end of the Trump administration, it is entirely possible that we go to the U.S. goes back to its traditional ideology and role globally as a defender of the international system. But it will be very organization, institution.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will ask the same kind of, sorry, また、今、トランスレーションが戻りましたんで、多分日本語になってるというふうに思いますので、今のお話は結構また広い質問で、次の質問にも関係するんですけど、私はやっぱりアメリカとか自由とか人権に対するリーダーシップを発揮されたと思うんですよね。私はもうこの年ですから、アメリカの音楽、映画、様々な文化に触れながら、それでもやっぱりアメリカの民主主義、自由を守る、人権を守るということの、やっぱりリーダーシップにすごい私は憧れててですね、留学をしてきたと。で、特になんですかね、ケネディ大統領のAsk not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country とアメリカ国内に行き、世界に対しても同じことをみんなでやろうよと。それは自由を守るためなんだっていう。そういう、やっぱり、なんですかね。アメリカの歴代の大統領が同じようなことを聞きながらやっぱ育ったということで、今回のトランプ政権の登場による、様々な変化は非常に残念であり、それにより、失ったものも結構大きいんじゃないかなと。これを取り戻すのかどうかということで、次の、2年後の、新しい大統領がどうなのかというところなんですけれど、現在やっぱりその影響が非常に大きくてですね、既存の国際市場がやっぱり機能しなくなっていると。それに代わる新たなグローバルガバナンスの枠組みはどのようになっていくのかなと。その時の市民社会、あるいは日本の役割、期待はどうなのかなというふうに思ってますので、まずそこについてアメリカのリーダーシップもすでにお話はされてますけれど、改めてちょっとお伺いできればなという、その影響を我々はどう受け止めて、これから改善していけるのかというところが、市民社会の我々の役割でもあるかなと思います。いかがでしょうか? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, that was very clear. Thank you. No, I agree with you very much. I mean, the U.S. has historically served as a defender of international institutions, of democracy, however imperfectly, and international engagement and international cooperation. And the challenge is as the U.S. has pulled back, and Trump is a president unlike any in U.S. history, in many ways the worst president we have had, for his disregard of institutions, of laws, his embracing of corruption, and the creation of a completely alternate narrative around the desire for his power and his personal need for praise as, in essence, a more authoritarian ruler. That as the U.S. has pulled back, I think the challenge is we enter a more multipolar world And in many ways, some other places have not engaged. I mean, Europe has its eyes on Russia and Ukraine, so it has its greater spending on its defense systems, also decreasing development assistance. And I think your point is a very good one, is that the sort of regional and middle powers of the world have a unique role to play. And Prime Minister Carney of Canada said this very, very nicely, that there is no longer a world where one could just assume to follow positive history of the United States around issues of development, democracy, or rights, but rather that the championing of international cooperation, the championing of civil society, of democratic cooperation, this is an opportunity for the Japanese government to step into this, not as a follower of a major power, but in a coalition with others like-minded countries who want to affirm their own democratic institutions, and recognizing that there's broad support for issues of official development assistance, of improving human welfare, of advancing human rights in many countries and many people around the world. The U.S. is no longer the platform that is going to push that. I do believe a future administration will try to do so, which is good. But I think it's important, especially in terms of support for civil society, that the Japanese government and Japanese civil society step up.
Okay, thank you. どうもありがとうございます。私の次の質問をしようと思ったんですが、かなり答えていただいたということですね。ですから、これは残念なことではありますけれど、我々はチャンスと日本の役割をどう果たしていくのかと。戦後の、日本はご存知のように、もう日米関係、日米同盟重視があって、その後にどうするかっていう話でずっと、この80年間、来ましたので、すでにアメリカはもうだいぶ前から世界の警察をやめたとかですね、おっしゃって、その世界への関わり合いも、やっぱり時間の問題として、やっぱり薄くなっていくっていうのは、ある意味当然なことなのかなと。それを踏まえて我々は、特にこの、インドパシフィックっていう、FOIP っていう、枠組みがあってですね、我々はやっぱりこのアジアなり太平洋なりそういうところで、どうしていくかと。ただ引き続き日米関係はこれからも、重要なので、これはそういうふうに捉えてですね、我々の市民社会の役割も、やっぱり拡大していくんじゃないかなと、そういうふうに捉えて、いきたいなというふうに、思っておりますんで、よろしくお願いします。ありがとうございます。で、すでに答えられた次の質問に行きたいと思うんですが、やっぱり USAID のなんですかね、解体っていうのは非常に私はショックで、93年からワシントンの日本大使館で3年間 USAID が私のカウンターパートとして、一緒に仕事をしたという、経緯もあり、USAID の働いてた人の顔が浮かんでですね、そういう方たちがやっぱ解雇されたり、解体されて他へ行ったりするっていう今の現状でありますので、よくこんなことができるんだなというのが、正直なところですが、一方、ヨーロッパを見渡してもですね、やっぱり OD ということで、レファレンスとしてご紹介するのは、OECD ダックの2025年の実績なんですが、全体的に ODA が 23.1% の削減です。これは過去最大でありますし、2年連続。で、1位がですね、今、ドイツになります。で、2位がアメリカなんですが、なんと 56.9% の削減に前年度比でなりました。半分ですね。で、3位が英国で日本、そして5位がフランスということで、他の国々が2桁台の減少なんですが、まだ日本はですね、1桁台にとどまっているという状況がありますので、まずはですね、アメリカの援助政策なり、今の体制なり、その辺の現状をですね、あれはUSAID の解体からもちろん変わっていると思うんですが、その辺ちょっと整理してですね、お伺いしたいと思うんですが、いかがでしょうか。
Thank you. And first, just an observation on the alliance, the Pacific Alliance, alliance with Japan, and also the alliance of NATO. if Trump had his way, there would be no alliances. But there is a strong support, including in the Republican Party, for the maintenance of the traditional alliances that the United States has had. And I think one of the reasons that the Trump administration has had difficulty in dismantling things is because of this deep support, including within his own party. Moving on to USAID, I mean, the way the place to start is what has been the impact of these cuts. And there's been some measurement in the Lancet, a medical journal, that in 2025, USAID cuts alone resulted in over 750,000 additional deaths around the world, and an estimated 14 million people could die before 2030. The approach to dismantling USAID in many ways was cruel. It has also proved to be in many ways illegal, but it is difficult to recreate something that has been cut. The original cuts to USAID were 83%. And now Congress has put more money back that leans the cuts around 56%, as you mentioned. But that broad desire to dismantle not just the resources, but the technical infrastructure, the knowledge. And we tend to focus on AID and cuts, but a lot of the cuts then flowed into NGOs receiving AID money, into local civil society receiving those funds. And tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs around the world were then lost because of this, and done in a very cruel way. That you had food that was available for famine relief rotting. You had medication for individuals who needed to live locked up in warehouses. So rather than simply reducing ODA, the Trump administration did it in a way that will, I think, go down in history as one of the more cruel and inhuman decisions associated with ODA around the world. I think, did this have an impact on USAID and its contractors? Massively, yes. For global civil society, I think global civil society will go on, but it will be in an aid system that is different than the one that I have lived through or lived with. And I think our challenge now is moving away from survival to an adaptation of what does the future look like. And this is where there is a significant space for leadership for the Japanese government and civil society pushing the Japanese government. You could talk about, the soft power of Japan. There's an enormous space for Japan to step in many ways, for example, as the Norwegian and Scandinavian countries have done with their ODA. But we're seeing, this greater increase to locally led development, more south-south, but it could be east to south or east to west, different forms of engagement. But none of this is going to make up for the large humanitarian gaps that we're seeing. I think just recently the UN was looking at a 54% reduction in global humanitarian assistance at a time where we're seeing a massive increase of hunger and political violence around the world. In some places, China has stepped in. I'm aware of a project what was my niece worked on in Cambodia. It was tens of millions of dollars USAID supporting the Cambodian education system. It took the Chinese government less than a week to come in and replace the money that AID had there. So if you're in a country that is of political interest to other powers, then you do okay, and you get your resources from another power. And in this case, I think a loss for the U.S. But if you're in a country where there isn't an interest in you or your minerals, and there isn't an interest in the role you play in the world, where you don't have the ability to be self-reliant and to raise local resources, then you have a significant challenge, because it will be the poorest among those countries that suffer the most, and the poorest individuals. So we're looking at displaced individuals, individuals who remain refugees, that are critical. So this, it shows me in many ways that the role of official development assistance will not go away if one is looking at the most vulnerable places on Earth. That private funds can step in somewhat, but not enough. And that we as NGOs need to find new partnership models, which I could talk about, new ways of diversifying our resources to try to make a difference in those places that are no longer the interest of the world. Just because we don't measure how much hunger there is as much as we used to does not mean that we aren't living through a period of, in essence, a significant global crime when it comes to ignoring the plight of the world's most vulnerable people.
はい、Thank you. どうもありがとうございました。これからの国際協力のあり方についても後で聞こうと思ったんですが、すでに触れていただいたということで、もうちょっとそのダイレクトにお伺いしたいんですが、その去年の USAID の解体によってさっきショックで1400万人の方が亡くなる、可能性があるというところなんですが、一方、アメリカ国内にも少しやりすぎてるんではないかということで、中間選挙を控えながら、その国際協力 ODA の揺り戻し的にもうちょっとやっぱり戻すべきじゃないか。あるいは今国務省の中でその機能がありますが、そういうものが今後やっぱり、今の状況に対してやっぱりもうちょっとやっぱり国際協力 ODA を戻すべきじゃないかっていう議論は具体的にすでに行われてるんでしょうか。すでに戻ってるっていうお話もありましたし、共和党も中間選挙を控えてですね、今のトランプ政権に対する動きに対して反旗を翻している、議員も少しずつ出つつあるというお話もありましたけど、今のその援助、能力、体制、政策に対して少しもうちょっと改めてちょっとお伺いしたい。どういう変化が起きてるんでしょうかと。
I think you're right. I mean, the original cuts I mentioned, around over 80%, is come back up to around 50%. Has moved into the State Department as a new way of doing. Our challenge is the approach of the Trump administration towards a professional bureaucracy of laying off of thousands of workers and experts, both in the health field or other areas around the issues of climate or any area of science. That even if the U.S. Maintains itself around 60% of what it used to spend on its development assistance, it has lost a lot of the technical capacity to actually implement. So I think one of the things we will see is an inability of the U.S. to spend money that it is now Congress says it must spend. I mean, the way our system is supposed to work, the only entity that has the power to say how money or where money will be spent is the U.S. Congress, not the president. And as Congress says, you must spend this, we will find that the executive branch under President Trump has dismantled its capacity to actually implement its the role is supposed to play. So we will, even though money may be there, it's moving into state, they're tending to lean on some contractors, but even we find with NGOs, they may be implementing in a certain country, and the question is not what is the hunger rate in the country or fragility or what can be done around particular issues, especially like gender or anything like that. The question is more, are there mineral interests for the U.S. or are there some specific, very transactional interests of the U.S.? So there's a significant disconnect between the ideology of this administration and where Congress is headed. I think that disconnect will get stronger in the midterms, and we will end up with a clash of Congress saying you must spend your money on this as required by law, and there will be an enormous debate and battle around that, particularly in the U.S. courts.
Thank you. ありがとうございます。その意味において、アメリカ国内も NGO に対する影響は受けてますし、アメリカの直接な影響というのは日本の NGO はもちろん間接的に受けているところはおりますけれど、直接的にはそれほど大きくはない部分もあるんじゃないかなと思います。で、一つやっぱりそのアメリカはこの大打撃で NGO に対する、ある意味ではその請負コントラクター、NGO を通じて、お金が流れる比率が、3割とか、4割とか非常に高いんですよね。その影響は受けてるっていうのはありますが、一方で、アメリカはその寄付文化が土壌に、あり、その基盤があってですね、そういうものが NGO を支えてるというふうに思ってますが、これはどういう状況なんですか？日本を見るとですね、残念ながら寄付文化アメリカほどありませんし、財政基盤は脆弱でありますので、今は現状なんとかですね、ODA の、NGO に対する予算も現状維持ですけれど、削減されるとですね、非常に NGO への影響も非常に大きくなるなというふうに思いますので、この辺今の寄付っていうものに対する状況がどうなっているのか、改めて後で伺いますけれど、ODA に頼るんじゃなくてですね、民間資金とかいろんなやり方でですね、この資金不足のところをやっぱり補っていかなきゃいけないんじゃないかという動きもありますので、その辺今アメリカの NGO のもうちょっと具体的にどんな影響がまだ受けてるのか、それがやっぱ寄付が増えてるのか、どういうことで、お金をジェネレートしてるのかっていうところについてはいかがでしょうか。という質問を伺いながら、事務局の方に、私ちょっと質問を見る時間がないんで、そこでなんか質問を出した方がいいっていうことであれば、ちょっとインタビューして、途中で言っていただけますでしょうか。よろしくお願いします。まずじゃあ、サムさんにアメリカの NGO の状況についてお伺いしたいと思います。
Thank you very much. And let me. I think what we see in the news and what's happening in the U.S. The news tends to focus on the disruption of U.S. democracy and so forth. But let me start transitioning a little bit to the hopeful side here. And this gets to U.S. politics, but it translates eventually to international NGOs. The Trump administration has had a policy of wanting the U.S. to be more Christian and white, in essence, taking away from our history of being a multi-ethnic and cultural society with different religions. And so they've tried an experiment in a place that the population was 80% from Western Europe, a place that tended polite in terms of officialdom, and they decided to go after a small group of 100,000 people from Somalia as a start to expel them from that state. And what happened, and this is in Minnesota, is that the white population, the average population of that state said, I do not want to be cruel. I want to be seen as humane. I will go out on the streets and protest and push back. And if you push even harder, I will protest even louder. So you're seeing a rise of a movement of civil society saying, no, this type of behavior is not acceptable. And the Trump administration has had to confront the fact that in a mid-sized state where it thought it had an advantage, it was unable to implement a rather radical policy. So what does this have to do with the international NGO? It shows that there is a broad desire among many within the U.S. population for both a better country, but also a better world, and that a willingness to put their resources behind that. We are seeing in the conservative side, the evangelical side, a continued giving towards international NGOs. We're seeing many faith groups stepping up and continuing their engagement through NGOs directly. And one of the challenges, however, is that the world has become less of a north giving to south, because a lot of the giving is now internal battles of local giving within the US to address the challenges that we face. And one of the challenges we have is to remind people that they cannot simply see the world in terms of what's happening with their neighbor, but what's happening with their neighbor across the seas, across and other places. And that commitment to something global, to broader principles is there. And when one tests ideas of commitment to the UN and its principles, or commitment to human welfare and so forth, there's still a very large portion of the US public that wants to engage that way. And I think that will be a positive trend. I believe a future administration will tap that energy. But again, I think it's important that the lessons that are happening in the US might apply to Japan. What happens with the Japanese public that may not feel like giving its resources overseas. The lesson we've learned is that you cannot ignore those domestic pressures, that you need to have programs that are also local within one's own country, even as you focus most of your resources to the poorest parts and the most vulnerable parts of the world.
Thank you. で、今、フロアから一件、まず質問で、石井さんからの質問を読みたいと、これ非常に重要なので、私も関心があって聞きたいなと思ってたんですけれど、ちなみに石井さんもワシントンに2回、在米隊に勤務されてたということで、アメリカの情勢についても非常によくご存知の方です。で、石井さんの質問は、ODA については、米国政府の政策の問題と同時に国民の支持の低下があり、日本では後者の方が深刻です。ODA に対する国民の支持を強化するためには、どのような方向があるのか、新しいナラティブの必要性など方向性について教えてほしいと。で、これはですね、今、ジャニックのワーキンググループでも一つ、インターナショナルセキュリティ、インターナショナルピース&セキュリティですね。で、やっぱりその日本でも防衛費がこの5年間でもう倍増するぐらいの勢いで増えててですね。まあ一方でなんとか下がってましたけれども、これまで現状維持をなんとかこらえてるんですけれど、やっぱり海外に援助するよりは国内の問題があるでしょうと。まあ防衛費は日本を守るためにはある程度やっぱり必要なんではないかっていう、そういう状況の中でですね、この安全保障の現実を踏まえながらも、どうしたら国際協力の必要性を訴えられるかという、そのナラティブをどうやって我々が作っていくかというのが今、我々の研究、議論しているところでありますので、ここについて何か、ヒントがあれば、教えていただきたいなというふうに思います。まずは、1件目の質問で、重要な関連性があるので、お伺いしました。
Thank you for the question. I think the core, the reality that ODA flows and has a significant impact on a nation's global security is important, just as it is important to say that ODA has a moral and values-based, principle-based purpose in the world. I think it comes down to a process of both defending the ODA practice and building a coalition for its expansion in the future. The defense tends to be an argument which is one of this is an expenditure that is a requirement for one's national security. There's a lot of truth to that argument. And a lot of ODA, especially in the US, is spent on procuring a goodwill of countries around the world or of individuals around the world. The argument that goes out the best one would be the U.S. investment in fighting HIV/AIDS through President Bush and the PEPFAR, Presidential Emergency AIDS Program, resulted in massive goodwill for the U.S. across Africa for many, many years. And that ability to intervene and reward with ODA is a tool that governments can have as part of their diplomatic engagement. That doesn't take away the importance of building a coalition among which the U.S. we've had to do with the American people, and that coalition has not been built around security, but rather more on a moral or principle base. There, I was involved in the creation of the One campaign and other efforts like that with college students and others to make the case that there is just like the fight for the environment and issues of climate, there should be a fight around issues of global poverty as a moral or political stance. In the U.S., we're looking at a base approximately maybe 20%. That base of individuals and corporations and so forth generates some $20 billion a year into broad global cooperation. And it will probably not get much larger than that 20%. But it's important that in Japan, there be an effort to identify what is the collective base of individuals who will support the missions of your organizations. And the challenge we found in the US was that we were approaching this as individual organizations, each organization fundraising for their own brand. And you cannot build a base if you're only fundraising for your own brand. So there had to be an effort that was looking beyond the brand of individual NGOs to a collective effort of efforts to provide information, to speak to the public in a way that increased over time the base of individuals who would support our organizations. The Gates Foundation, some others supported this. I think they would probably support doing the same thing in Japan. But that is this recognition that we do have a responsibility both to educate our own publics, but also to provide them with a way that they feel they can make a difference in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. 一つ我々も私も90年代に国際協力に関わっていましたけど、その時は国際協力っていうそのものだけで指示があったんですね。今国際協力言ったらそれ何ですかと。国際協力っていうそのイメージが湧かないんですよ。でも具体的には、だけど環境とか、いろんな問題に具体的にどういう効果があるんだっていうことを伝えれば、は得られる。そういう具体論を、具体的な成果が、途上国、ひでは日本にプラスになるんだっていう、説得の仕方は、
No, I think that it's linking that. I mean, one of the challenges one faces, both in terms of an argument with, especially when it comes to the public, is I found it in many people do not believe that you could actually do something about the world's problems. They've been persuaded that solutions are not possible. That being sort of cynical is an easier way to approach the world. After all, the media is telling them that these problems are simply getting worse, and that no matter how much you spend, nothing. If one brings it back to an individual level, this idea that, wait a second, how do societies evolve? Is it the government telling you what to do, or is it you with your family trying to improve your own well-being? Is it you with your neighbors trying to improve the well-being of your community? Is it you working with other civil society organizations around the world to try to make a difference? And then showing that we've practically actually significantly improved human welfare in this past 50, 60 years in a way that has never been done in human history. I think that the message that we've somehow failed misses the point that the change we're talking about is coming from the grassroots. One of the greatest creations of the 20th century was the recognition that the concepts of civil society, the idea that I could make a difference in the future of my society, of my community, of people around me, that I have a say over my future, and will organize myself to make a difference like that. That concept has gone global. It exists in all cultures. And in many ways, it has resulted in a much better world. And I think the challenge for people is to recognize that one can partner across borders, and that the primary tool to do that partnership across border, there are many, but one of the primary ones is the international NGO. It is an institution in your own country that you may trust with that, but that is not simply helping an individual because they're poor or they need resources right away, but you're joining them in a way to improve their future. And then you can make the case that actually their improved well-being actually results in improved well-being in your own country, and bring that back in a positive loop. So I think this sense that the world cannot be improved does not mirror the facts in terms of the decreases in infant mortality, increases of longevity, of the literacy of girls, or the changes in health status, the billions of individuals who moved out of extreme poverty, the ability to fight and end famines if we want to. All of these are facts that have been on the ground but have not been that well communicated, particularly in more affluent countries. And I think one of our challenges is to persuade our governments and others that it is in their interest for their national security, but also for this argument of improving human welfare everywhere as something that is in their national interests.
ありがとうございます。全くそうだと思いますので、ですね、一回60分で区切りをしなきゃいけないので、この辺で一つの区切りとして最後に、サムさんにメッセージをいただきたいと思いますが、結構キーワードできたのはですね、なんですかね、コラボレーションという、国を越えて、あるいは様々な協力が必要だということとかですね、ソリダリティっていうもあったかなというふうに思いますので、最後にまずは、この Prisoners of Hope というところからですね、Hope is Action という言葉もあったかというふうには思いますけれど、次の世代を支える、その若い世代に向けてですね、国際協力の必要性と含めてですね、最後にメッセージをいただいて、一つの区切りを終えてですね、後ほど Q&A をさらに増やしていければなと思いますので、よろしくお願いします。
Well, thank you. And before we move to the Q&A, just to me, the message I've tried to pull out in Prisoners of Hope, which is a term that came from Desmond Tutu, is that hope is not about optimism, is not believing that everything will work, or even that, you have a sense of what outcomes will be. But it is the decision to choose to act when the outcomes are uncertain. It's the belief that I can and will make a difference in the future in front of me, and then putting all your will and political action in that direction. That is what has enabled human change to happen. Partnering with individuals who have hope about their future is what makes development work. And our role as civil society in the global north is not to forget that we have an important role in terms of the solidarity of building a hopeful, democratic, and more inclusive future everywhere because of our desire to partner with others.
ありがとうございます。素晴らしい言葉で締めくくっていただいたと思いますので、一回ここで区切りをつけてですね、これからインフォーマルにいろいろ Q&A をしたいなというふうに思いますので、一つの区切りとしてですね、サムさんに、皆さんの感謝の気持ちを込めてですね、拍手をしていただきたいと思います。本当に今日は、ありがとうございました。